Bonjour à tous, merci d'être avec nous pour cette 12e édition du Paris Air Forum. Nous allons consacrer cette table au fret aérien à l'heure des droits de douane. Cette table sera tenue en anglais, donc je me permets juste de commencer en français. On switchera en anglais après. Il y a des traductions instantanées pour ceux qui le souhaitent via une application. Et nous allons y aller. Le Liberation Day a été un choc. L'instauration des droits de douane en pagaille par les États-Unis a secoué le monde économique. S'il est encore dur aujourd'hui d'évaluer les conséquences à long terme de ce choc, les remous qu'il provoque sont déjà nombreux. Et quand l'économie tangle, les acteurs du fret aérien sont souvent les premiers à le sentir. Lors de cette table consacrée au fret aérien à l'heure des droits de douane, nous allons voir comment ce secteur ressent ce moment particulier, nous allons voir comment il s'adapte et comment il réagit. Pour cela, nous recevons Alain GUERIN, donc directeur commercial de CMA CGM Air Cargo, Patrick MOEBEL, donc Président de FedEx Logistics, Henri Le GOUIS, Directeur général Commission de transport international de Geodis, et enfin Dave Andrews, CEO de Salle Aviation, Directeur général de Salle Aviation. Donc pour faciliter le dialogue, nous allons passer donc en anglais. Et to begin to open this panel discussion, I will ask you a general question. Has the Liberation Day already changed the rule for air freight today? Someone?
Yeah, for sure it did. There was clearly a before and an after. Massive capacity change, especially on certain routes. Volatility, a lot of uncertainty in the business, which is not good for our industry. So clearly big changes already taking place.
Okay.
Maybe I can complement that.
Of course.
Liberation Day was just the start. Obviously, there was Liberation Day, and anything that came after, putting in more tariffs, taking them off, putting them in, which created quite some challenges for the global supply chain just to adapt to those challenges. So shifts in capacity, shifts in supply chains from our customers, and mainly uncertainty with regards to the US transportation market and overall uncertainty with regards to where our customers are going to produce and how can they optimize their flows of goods and what is the best way to bring those goods into the US.
So you have already seen some significant change in the volume, in the tariffs, but not in the tariff, in the rates, in the freight rates already?
Yeah, so the biggest change wasn't actually Liberation Day. For us, it was when de minimis went away on May 2nd. So maybe I can re-explain what de minimis is. So by US law, every individual could import for $800 per day of goods for duty-free. And on May 2nd, for China, that loophole or that advantage for every individual got taken out. So all those goods who came in duty-free as of May 2nd were subject to paying duty and to having an import declaration or customs clearance done on those goods. So that was a huge impact on the air freight. And I believe the week of May 2nd, capacity on the Trans-Pacific from China to the US specifically got cut in half, got taken down by 42 or 43%.
Okay. Henri Le GOUIS, maybe to follow just what Patrick MOEBEL said, we saw very different change between, according to geography, between Trans-Pacific, Transatlantic. It's really different depending where you are in the world.
I must say, yes, there will be substantial impacts on the different routes. But what I would really like to emphasize is the fact it's all related to anticipation. Before Liberation Day, everybody tried to anticipate what could be the announcement behind Liberation Day. After Liberation Day, everybody tries to anticipate when it's going to be applied and to which extent, which is quite erratic those days. Huh? We have announcements every week, so it's very difficult to build a strategy. Now, carriers, forwarders, shippers try to adapt to this new context, of course. The impact of de minimis, I fully subscribe to what Patrick just said, is huge, has a huge impact, even more than general cargo. And of course, it brings some repositioning of flights, what we see of capacity, which was allocated between Asia and the US, especially China, to Asia, to Europe, that we see massively, and to a smaller extent on the transatlantic route.
Okay. You both mentioned the minimis, but Alain, so we saw also some different change according to the flows. Today, the e-commerce flows seems more affected than the B2B flows.
I mean, they are affected on the China-US routes. The rest of, I mean, China-US across the board is about 15% of worldwide air cargo. So you could argue that there's another 85%, which is at the moment more or less not impacted by those changes. Although indeed, uncertainty, volatility, and decisions to come might change the game very clearly. So e-commerce, there was a massive stop. As Patrick said, you know, last week of April versus the first week of May, there's the equivalent of about 40 to 50 777 freighters that were not operating on those routes. So some of the aircraft are already being redeployed onto other routes, adding more capacity, therefore putting pressure on yields. But at the end of the day, what we see as well is that standard cargo, you know, general cargo or special products, anything but e-commerce, is still fairly robust. I mean, it's a fact that, you know, this world needs air cargo, and you need, I mean, exports from China will continue to the US.
So, according to what you just said, maybe the e-commerce could be the main victim of all this movement.
It could very well be. It is already on the China-US routes, although, of course, the goods, they find different ways to still reach the US. It's a bit more expensive, well, it is significantly more expensive, actually. And you have the e-commerce players, the e-tailers, they all try to find new business models. They go more maybe on the fulfillment side. They try to adjust their supply chain to remain relevant for their customers.
Okay. And maybe if they can't send their goods in Europe, in the US, maybe Europe could be the most...
That remains to be seen, yes. There are discussions about, let's say, measures to prevent the massive development of fast fashion and e-commerce. We'll have to see. At the moment, what is announced is probably not so much of a big impact. So we'll have to see what is around the corner. But if that comes, that will definitely have an impact because, I mean, until indeed end of April, e-commerce worldwide was about 25% of the cargo flows.
Okay. Maybe Patrick, so the European taxation on small parcel will not have the same impact than the abolition of minimis?
Well, we don't know yet. Obviously, it's not passed. I think what is planned, and maybe the two Europeans here, I think it's €2 per package, I think, what yes. is being planned, which doesn't seem very much. I don't think that will be bringing much dissuasion to, to somebody shipping fast fashion from Asia to Europe. I don't think it would be very disruptive. But okay. we're quite a bit away of that.
You seem to agree to that.
No, yeah, I agree. I think that's a small amount. If you add it to an average purchase price of $100, €2 is not going to make much difference. I agree. But I think the bigger challenges we've touched on is just the uncertainty. I think that's what's affecting everybody. As an operator, we've seen a number of our customers. Thankfully, we weren't too exposed to the Trans-Pacific market, but we've seen customers move their flows from what was going to the US is now going either to Europe or some of the other regions. We've seen an increase in requests for capacity in Southeast Asia, for example. So I think the positive news is the Chinese manufacturers are still manufacturing. It's still there. It's just been sold to other people.
As an airline, airline company holding, because you have, I don't remember, maybe 5 airlines in your holdings, plus partnership. I think this tariff issue could also affect you directly on your spare parts, for example.
So at the moment, used aircraft and used aircraft parts are exempt. But the problem, I think what Patrick was saying, is the uncertainty. You know, what the rules are today might not necessarily be the rules for tomorrow. So that becomes a big challenge. And then as that flows into the newer manufactured stuff, there's so much raw product that gets exported to the US to be processed, to come back to Europe, to go back again. I mean, similar to what we saw with the automotive industry. That trans-border issues is going to become a real, particularly if they insist on this heavy tariffs on raw aluminiums and raw metals. That could be a real game changer.
Now, you all speak about uncertainty, but you had to adapt really quickly to this situation. How do you manage that? I think it's difficult to adapt, not too fast, not too slow, and still be agile facing this situation.
Yeah, I can go. So we adapt at the pace of our customers. So what we are trying to do is work next to our customers in order to manage their supply chain and provide them with solution in order to be able to still sell their goods in the market they want to. So adaptation is just what we have to do currently, meaning being nimble, being flexible, and making sure we keep focused on our customers and what their needs are based on what we can influence. And obviously, policy we cannot influence. We are actually, I would say, driven by policies made by countries, and we adapt to that. And the great thing, FedEx is in 220 countries worldwide, and wherever that supply chain goes, with China +1, for example, so we have seen switches of a capacity and demand from our customers away from China into Vietnam, into India, for example, and we have redeployed the capacity to those manufacturing countries. And this has started since quite a while. This has started under Trump 1 already. And the big challenge is China is very reactive to new, needing to manufacture new products, and they are used to that. They have a huge manufacturing base, versus Vietnam and India are not there yet. So in order for them to start up a new manufacturing line or new products, it takes way longer than what it does in China.
Yes, I would say that agility is by the essence of freight forwarding. We always have to cope with new situations, to find solutions. That's the basic of our jobs. So when our customers have the ability to change their sourcing strategy rapidly for basic commodities, then of course repositioning capacity with the support of the airlines is something that we can manage easily. Maybe the greatest challenge for us is that most of our customers cannot change their sourcing from day one. They still have, for instance, to keep on using China with a fluctuating environment, and they're asking for visibility, for the rate level, for the capacity until the end. And that's much more difficult for us to reply, because due to the uncertainty you mentioned.
Yeah, and that drives some differentiating demand. So we have seen a spike in the US of free trade zones. So what does a free trade zone do? It allows you to bring goods into the US, store them in a free trade zone, not paying tariffs or duty and wait until the duty is, or the tariffs are in a more favorable environment. So big spike in demand around customs bonded warehouses or free trade zones, and that's how the customers are trying to alleviate that bottlenecks they have or the higher rates they have.
You want to add something?
Yeah, maybe to reflect on what the colleague just said about agility and being close to customers. In those particular cases, it was difficult because our customers are freight forwarders. They had no clue how they would be cooked at the end of the day. And what was very difficult is that their own customers was also completely in the dark. So that whole uncertainty in the whole chain made the whole exercise very, very difficult to anticipate and so on. So we were also very close to customers, but in certain cases, we even suggested to customers, don't wait until 2nd of May. Just anticipate, try to think out of the box, and think of, if China cannot be connected to the US, other countries can be connected to the US, and China can be connected to other countries. So let's be a little bit creative, but that really calls for even more proximity. Sometimes, air cargo is like a chain. So we talk to the party just before and just after. What I would wish is we are more like in an ecosystem where we better understand the needs of the real customers, i.e. the shippers. Forwarders are important as well, of course, but the shippers, because they are the ones sitting on top of the cargo, and they are the ones indeed having to reimagine the supply chain and sell their goods. And we are at the end of the food chain, and that exercise in a heavily regulated environment, traffic rights and you name it, can be actually quite painful for airlines. If you want really to adjust quickly, if you don't have the big size and the big portfolio of traffic rights, that can be a challenge.
So do you think it could redefine the ways on how the market works?
I think what we've seen at CMA CGM Air Cargo, it was difficult times, but at the end of the day, air cargo is complex and difficult. And there were a lot of uncertainties, a lot of issues, but there were also a lot of opportunities that did come out of this situation. And yeah, it forced us to be really super agile, to be even closer to the customers of our customers, have discussions with shippers, forwarders, and airlines. So yeah, it forced it to be even more agile. That's very clear.
Dave, you mentioned several times the uncertainty, and apparently today the uncertainty is more effective than the tariff in themselves. So when we'll see the real impact of this tariff on the market? When we could expect that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think it's anybody's guess, but yeah, I think the uncertainty really is it 10% today, is it 20% tomorrow? We heard a month ago that there was a great deal done between the US and the UK, but when you talk to people today, they say, well, it's not signed yet, they're still not sure. So I think that uncertainty is a major issue. Not just for us as operators, but I think that's what's really applying into the shipping industry as well. If you can imagine on an airplane, it takes you 12 hours to get somewhere. In a ship, it takes you 6 weeks. Look how much this world has changed in the last 6 weeks. So how do you realistically book that load if you're not sure what it's going to be when it gets there?
If there is a real open trade war, what could it mean for your sector? If US apply its tariff as said at first during the Liberation Day, and maybe what are you asking to avoid this situation from your government, from European Union, for the European player here, but also from US government to avoid that?
I don't know what the European Union can do for us. What is for sure is that we are not finished with the different adjustments on the tariffs. I think the story is far from being over. We see developments every week, and we have to live with it. So, having said that, our job, our mission as forwarders is to identify, anticipate as possible all the potential effects. And I would really like to insist on the numerous disruptions we see today, which cumulated could result in the next month in a big turmoil in the global supply chain, especially in the US. I think I want to alert also on the fact that we see signals like the congestions coming in the ports, the difficulty to reposition some capacity, which combined could really result in major difficulties and major emergency. And in this kind of emergency, of course, air freight remains the perfect adjustment factor.
Okay. So one great thing about the tariffs and COVID-19 actually, so before COVID-19, nobody knew what the global supply chain was. Nobody. You know, I remember it was like in December 2022, I tried to order a whiskey in a bar, and he didn't have the whiskey I wanted, and he said it's because of the global supply chain. So that's the positive for our business. Now, people understand at a level even below how the supply chain is made up, and they start understanding the tariffs, the trade agreements. So, you know, long term, for what we do here, there is a whole different assessment done within the companies and overall in trade of the transportation and the air freight industry as a whole, which has now a whole different level of understanding and review that we are key to making the global economy flow. And that's, I think, a pretty good thing for the industry. Now disruptions will happen, and as Henri said, we will adapt to those. And the goods historically always have found a way to find trade. FedEx was founded based on open global trade. That's what our founder basically always has advocated for. So, and you know, and global trade will happen whether there are tariffs or not. But you know, short term there will be disruption.
Okay. As Henri said, the stop and go, continuous stop and go could also create disruption and congestion on operational aspects. Do you feel that already? Congestion in US port as during COVID or in the Chinese port? Maybe you have other example, but...
So the first congestion we have seen with the implementation of tariffs. So as I said earlier, de minimis, you didn't need to clear customs. You didn't need to deliver a paper to US Customs to clear the goods. Since 2nd of May, you have everything coming into the US needs to have a customs clearance. Well, obviously that's millions more customs clearances per day. We have to increase our labor pool twofold just to cope with the volume, which creates more cost. And obviously, you need to find those people, and they don't come on board right away. So there are delays just because of that, because of the sheer volume of the customs clearance when you get into the US. And I'm sure there are more, maybe Henri.
Yeah, I would not put the sole responsibility on the shoulders of the logistics industry. It has also to do, for instance, in China, some Chinese producers have put their production on hold for a few weeks. Then it's very difficult to resume the production over a couple of days because the regulation is about to change, or there could be, once again, some anticipations that the tariffs could look differently. So when you have the stop and go in production, it impacts, as a result, consequently, the supply chain. And then, of course, you create congestion, you create bottlenecks, and you have to find for alternative solutions.
But it's very true. But you know, when it comes to congestion, when those measures were first announced by Trump, so back in Q1, when he said, you know, I'm going to stop it, he stopped it for 2 days, and then he took it back and said, okay, I'll give you another 3 months to think about it. So first, there was a warning already, but during that first instance, there were millions. If I look at Chicago, there were millions of e-commerce shipments that suddenly arrived at Chicago, and the airport instantly, overnight, got completely congested. So congestion meant in those days that people freight forwarders coming with standard cargo, general cargo, special products and so on, just could not deliver. Nothing could pass through Chicago airport. And then you multiply this at the scale of the US, and you reach massive congestion there. And then you have no manpower, you have nobody who could handle those custom clearance processes and so on. Customs were not there, so a complete disaster. So those small events can actually bring the logistics chains to a complete stop very quickly.
U.S. administration said they want to negotiate trade agreements, bilateral trade agreements with different countries in the world. Are you confident in the fact that this trade agreement, if signed, could prevent disruption, or it could just limit the effect of the tariff and the situation?
I think certainty will certainly help. I think business has survived over centuries and will continue to survive. The issue is you need to know what you're dealing with. If it's 10% and people know it's going to stay as 10%, business will find a way to get around that, over it, under it, whatever they need to do. So I think once the certainty is there, that will take away a lot of the risk and the other volatility that we're seeing in the market. But until that's confirmed, I think we're going to live with these issues we've got.
Okay. We are here to speak about tariffs, but we saw also some big movement due to the geopolitical situation. We saw this night the situation in the Middle East. It could also affect your business.
Everything which happens anywhere in the world affects our business. At least, if I take FedEx as an example, we have 30 million customers and we deliver to 200 million individuals. So, whatever happens anywhere in the world will have an impact on the supply chain. I'm sure what happened yesterday, I flew in this morning from Singapore, and it took a little longer because we had to avoid the Middle Eastern region when we flew over. So, since we had issues with Russia, our planes going from Asia to Europe take 1.5 hours longer or need to refuel in the Middle East rather than flying over Russia. So whatever happens in the world has a direct impact always on the supply chain, either cost-wise or time-wise or accessibility-wise, and in general, it creates more cost. Therefore, it's more costly to the consumer.
Yes, we would be happy to deal only with operational issues. But what we notice since a couple of years, mostly since COVID time, is each year we have to deal with massive external shocks on which we have a limited grip. So we have to find backup plans, we have to find solutions. This will impact, of course, with no-fly zones, like you mentioned rightly. This will impact also the price for fuel, which was the only positive news for this last month. So we have to deal permanently with that, to combine new solutions, to adapt, and to find a new way to move the cargo. Because at the end of the day, whatever happens, we will move the cargo.
Yeah. You say you will find a new way to move the cargo, but regarding, as we have already said, do you think this situation could lead to a change in the balance between air freight and sea freight, for example?
Not in the short term. Huh? In the short term, when you have massive disruptions, uncertainty, shortage, stop and go, you only encourage air freight. Okay. There's a long-term tendency, but which needs to be evidenced, to move from air freight to sea freight. But it's without taking into consideration all these external shocks we mentioned previously.
That's correct. I think after COVID, a lot of shippers actually made the promise to shift more cargo from air freight to sea freight. That also means a lot of changes in their logistic chains. I would agree that short term, probably no big impact. The only impact would be actually the cost of operations going up, and therefore the cost to customers. Because you make detours, you fly longer, your vessels are flying through good hopes and not through the Suez Canal and so on. So you're just pumping more cost into the equation.
Do you think it could lead to change among the players with maybe consolidation? Regarding this situation, we could move some lines on the market?
When you mean consolidation, you mean merger and acquisitions within players of...
Yes, maybe. Because the crisis situation could create opportunities on the market. Or
yeah, so those changes, obviously, depending on how your cash flow situation is or your network is, might create stress on the various players in the industry, and therefore, some might be prone to a quick or cheap takeover. And our industry always has been very opportunistic with regards to that. But in general, we are very fragmented. The transportation environment and the forwarding environment specifically is very fragmented, and I'm not working in Paris anymore, but I remember at Charles de Gaulle there were about 300 or 400 freight forwarders. Today it's more or less the same amount, and so there was consolidation, but it's still very, very fragmented. So we'll see more and more consolidation happening, because it's not good for the industry to be too fragmented, and those situations will eventually enable the stronger to buy the weaker and at a better price.
I think consolidation will continue, because it already exists, because you need to bring a global response. Having said that, I wouldn't like to be the one to build a business plan for the next 2 years, because that could be quite hectic to defend. And what is really key is, in this industry, you need to be global, but you need to have locally the right people to handle the job. So we should never lose this consideration.
There's an old saying that always says, never waste a good crisis. So yeah, I'm sure there will be opportunities that will evolve out of it. Some will survive, some will get stronger, some won't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, in the months to come, probably you see market adjustment. So most likely rates are coming down, inflation going up. The only good news, as you said, Henri, is that the cost of fuel is still, for the moment, fairly okay. But you still have a lot of old aircraft, flying, because the cost of flying is not so expensive right now. If this setup or paradigm is changing, then of course there will be some changes from an operator perspective, for sure.
And I think you made an acquisition recently.
That's right. Yeah, recently we took over Belgium Airlines. Yes.
Dave, after the COVID-19, we talk a lot about the end of globalization, but nothing seems to have really changed since then. We talk about nearshoring, friendshoring, China plus one, but do you think the moment, this current moment, this situation could lead to an acceleration of this movement or real concretization?
Yeah, I don't think so personally. I think we live in a global industry. Everything's made somewhere else, assembled somewhere else, and moved around. So, but again, it depends on how long the situation continues. Whether a major trade war, as you say, could have a different effect. But I would not think that we're going to end away from globalization. It might change how we do some stuff, but it's taken us 30 years to build this global industry. It's not easily going to be given up.
And so please.
No, I think it will not change in the short term, because it's too complex. The supply chains are too complex. Guillaume Fauré was mentioning you need 3 million spare parts to build an aircraft. How can you imagine that they would come from one single country or one single region? I think it doesn't make any sense. What I believe much more is that in the global sourcing strategies, there should be more and more backup plans. That means alternative sourcing, at least that you not depend on one sole country.
Yeah, he said it's too. Guillaume Fauré said it's too early to think about regionalization of the supply chain. Well, it's on a specific industry, in the aeronautics industry, which is really integrated in both parts of Atlantic. But do you feel some little chance?
No, you could say the same for automotive. You could say the same for a large number of industrial sectors.
Okay.
Huh? I think especially when the production becomes complex and requires a lot of subcontractors. The telecom industry is also exactly the same. I think you are fully dependent from your subcontractors, and they are globally widespread.
So today the China plus one is not a reality, or?
Yeah, that's not. I don't think that's what he's saying.
No.
I think what we are seeing is you still have global trade. There might be shifts from China to Vietnam or to India and maybe to Africa or nearshoring in Mexico. That's a reality. We see that. We have seen that after the tariffs. We have seen a spike in Vietnam and India. We have seen huge flows coming through Mexico instead of going into the U.S. directly. So the nature of the beast still will be global, but there might be shifts from one country to the other based on commodities or the tariffs.
And I think some sectors will be more prone or keen to change. Typically, the e-commerce players, if they want to remain relevant, they will have to come up with new business models. They will have to think of production in different countries to serve their customers. I mean, they have no choice. And that's what they do already today. I mean, people like Temu, for instance, they really actively consider other business models.
I think just from an aviation-specific perspective, I think the challenge and what we've seen really is that our supply chain is way too fragile. I think that's the big issue. There's no backup in some of the manufacturers. You've got some of the older airplanes where you're down to literally the last bits of parts that are available. And that, I think, is something that as an industry we need to look at because it's just way too fragile.
Okay. Maybe one way to have more resilience on the industry could be the technology. Do you use this new technology, data analysis, AI, to give more resilience to your operation today?
So no doubt that AI has helped us through the tariff issues. So as I mentioned earlier, those de minimis shipment didn't have a clearance. Therefore, there was no harmonized tariff code needed, HTS code, to import the goods. So we basically now are dealing with suppliers in China who don't know how to classify commodity or type of goods to bring that into the US. What we have developed is a software which assists the shipper in order to classify the goods and provide a harmonized tariff codes, which then will enable them to import that into the US. So technology in this case has solved a big issue for us. We would have needed to have way more manpower in order to do that. So AI and the fact that AI can learn so quick has definitely supported solutions in the supply chain for us in the case of tariffs, for example. And it's applicable everywhere, obviously.
It could also help with custom obligation. You said on the small parcels there was no custom. Now it could also help to deal with that.
Yes. So a customer deals with a bot and can interactively say, hey, if I add a button to this, or what what documents do I need to import into the US or into Brazil, and he has a dialogue with a bot, and the bot tells him what needs to be done. So based on the commodity he's exporting.
Yeah, definitely. Our job is as much moving physical goods as data. So we need to be empowered, and AI will definitely help. The only limit I would like to see in AI, it only deals with known data. That means it cannot always help with unpredictable situations. And this is definitely the core difficulty I see for the next month and the next years. Just, of course, to take advantage of this new technology, to capitalize and to provide more data and more accurate data, especially when things become more complex, like custom regulation, or more volatile, like rate level. But we shall never forget that the human skills will still be key to manage unpredictable situations.
Yeah, I think from an airline perspective, we are definitely leveraging AI typically, but that's much more on the tech side, on the maintenance side, and so on. Not so much on the commercial, although we are looking at use cases like, dynamic pricing and that kind of stuff. But I would definitely agree with what Henri said. I mean, tech will not solve on its own the problem. It's always the combination of tech, people, and processes that will allow us to have resilient supply chains, and it will make us go through those challenging times quite unharmed, and being able to capture opportunities that arise from this. So it's always tech, people, and processes.
So we couldn't imagine, just as in MRO with preventive maintenance, preventive MRO, some signs on the data analysis could announce some disruption on the supply chain. It's not thinkable to do that.
No, I think it is, but that would be more in the hands of our freight forwarder colleagues there. I mean, we see it again from an ops perspective very clearly, but when it comes to trade, that would be more, the forwarders being, the ones receiving all the demands from the shippers. But again, it's how do you predict the future looking or based on the past? That's difficult.
Yeah, it has to be based on the past. We go through scenario analysis and what ifs, but it's always based on the past. I mean, but the fact is, there is nothing better than reality, and you can be prepared for that and be nimble, as we said earlier, and for us to historically to fly into a certain destination and plan for that, it used to take us 3 months. When you are in an environment like tariffs, where you need to react within a few hours based on the fact that you can import at a certain rate and not, we had to shrink our fleet management to a way shorter lead time in order not to be needing, or you cannot afford anymore to plan 3 months out. You need to plan weekly out now.
As you said, even if AI could help you with custom obligation, you still had to hire a lot of people to manage this situation.
Yeah, because U.S. Customs still needs a human to push the entry. Legally, it needs to be someone sitting in the U.S. who actually submits the import declaration to U.S. Customs. So you couldn't automate the whole chain. You still need a human pushing the button.
But that data is still sensitive. We could imagine entire supply chain communicate, exchange data to enhance the flow, optimize the flow. Mm-hmm. We could imagine that in the near future.
No, to take your example, for instance, data will certainly help to improve the MRO policy. and anticipate and avoid failures. But when something happens, which is unexpected, you still need someone in your AOG desk on a Sunday night to send the spare part and to manage to take it, leave it.
I mean, from an airline perspective, in our opinion, there's two major areas where AI is going to help. One is where you're processing massive amounts of data, so analysis, those kind of things. And I agree on a technical side, aircraft records, for example. They say aircraft's only as good as the weight of the paper that goes with it. So that analysis where the AI can look at multiple sheets very quickly is actually a benefit. And the second one is where you're doing the same task over and over again. So we've seen a lot of benefit with AI, for example, in our call centers, in our passenger operations. Because if you look at that, there's only a certain number of questions you can ask. And if you can get the robot to answer 20 or 30% of those, that means they free up time for other people to deal with the more difficult things. But I think those are probably going to be the two leading areas from an aviation perspective.
It will be soon the end of this panel discussion, but I want to ask you one last question regarding, as we said during 45 minutes now, are you still optimistic for the future, still optimistic for the year 2025 and so on, or you have to prepare to a crisis? Are you still optimistic now for your markets?
Well, I'm definitely optimistic for the value added we are going to bring in the global supply chain. This morning I heard Olivier Andriès, the CEO from Safran, telling us that he has learned more about US customs in the last 6 months than his entire life, and that was valid for all his COMEX team. I think, what you said about COVID is right. We heard more about global supply chain management than maybe in the previous decades. So that means definitely we are living in a challenging world, turbulent, with unexpected events, but definitely in this kind of world, you need experts to manage the global supply chain. So there is room for global supply chain management, and there is room for innovation and new solutions and new partnerships.
I would agree. I think it's, I've come across more turbulent times than quiet times, to be very honest. It's not the first one, it's not going to be the last one. What I tend to notice is that we are getting faster and better when it comes to adjusting and reacting to those changes, and that's quite optimistic. So when it comes to the future, yes, IATA typically revise their forecast downwards slightly. The world is still full of pockets of opportunities. Up to us to size that, up to us to react, to adjust, to better listen to our customers, to understand what they want, and if we need to reinvent our business model, well, so be it. Let's reinvent it. But we have to reinvent it collectively.
No, I think we had a session with our team the other day, and somebody was saying it would be nice if we could have a normal year for a change. The problem is none of us could identify what a normal year is anymore, because we have literally had these so-called black swan events every year, in fact some years multiple, for the last 5 or 6 years. So yeah, we have to just keep being flexible, innovative, and ultimately delivering the service we can for our customers.
Well, I think they said it all. So maybe on a personal note, I'm very optimistic, because the only thing I can or I'm good at is the global supply chain. So my only choice is to be optimistic. So, and yeah, crisis is our world. That's what we have been doing for decades, and managing those various crises, little or big, is part of our DNA, and you always have either a crisis in a city, in a country, in a region, or globally, and we as global supply chain companies need to adapt to those, and we know how to do that. We are actually very good at that, not only as companies but as an industry. So bring it on.
Okay, so now I have to say to you, thank you to be here with us, to attend to the Paris Air Forum. Merci à vous tous d'être venus à cette session du Paris Air Forum. Je vous souhaite une bonne continuation et une bonne fin de journée.